You are muted.
We lost you.
Muted, Ligia.
Ligia.
It muted itself. Again, good afternoon and welcome. We're delighted to have you here. I'm Ligia Nerona. I'm the head of UNEP's New York office, and I'm very pleased and honored to be moderating this evening. This topic, as we all know, is very important, not only because of the planetary emergencies that we all face, but also because it's very timely, given that 2021 is such a pivotal year for the 3 COPs that we are going to have and for multilateralism. It's very important to also recognize the objectives that we have for this event, to raise awareness about the process towards and the approach for an ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to be agreed at the COP15. Demonstrate the importance of such an ambitious outcome for the wider sustainable development agenda and illustrate opportunities for mainstreaming of biodiversity and nature on the 2021 UNNY agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that we need to go beyond just the usual biodiversity tracks, but also focus on socioeconomic and system-wide transformations in order to improve the well-being of people. Before I invite the co-hosts to welcome you to this event, let me share a few housekeeping rules. First, please stay muted. Please place your questions on the chat. And for the interactive segment at the end, time allowing, we will invite requests from the floor. But now I have great pleasure to welcome remarks by the permanent representative of Colombia, His Excellency Ambassador Guillermo Fernandez de Soto Valderrama. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Ligia, Assistant Secretary General for UNEP, dear Deputy Secretary General, dear Amina, dear President of the General Assembly, ambassadors and colleagues. For Colombia, it is a pleasure to co-host and welcome you to the high-level event Raising Ambition for Nature. We live in the middle of a planetary crisis due to climate change, the loss of biodiversity, pollution, and COVID-19. The interlinkages between human ecosystems' health have never spoken so clearly. To avoid a similar crisis in the future, we need to place people and the planet in the center of the recovery. Sustainable pathways that allow us to build back better and successful deliver on the 23 agenda must be carried out without further delay. We have a unique opportunity to do so this year in October during the COP15 Biodiversity, which will adopt the global framework post to 2020. The Biodiversity Summit, convened by the President of the General Assembly, highlighted the relevance of this framework to agree on measures to protect nature and to mobilize all relevant stakeholders to implement them. Today, we have a chance to keep the momentum of this process and to catalyze actions within the United Nations toward the adoption of an ambitious outcome from COP15. The world needs to be aware of the relevance of this milestone to initiate a transformative change for living in harmony with nature. The scientific evidence is clear. It is unquestionable. Unsustainable patterns of production and consumption and harmful practices applied in productive sectors have significantly raised the pressures on global biodiversity loss. During the last 5 decades, human activities have placed over 1 million species on the verge of extinction, transformed 75% of our lands and impacted 66% of our oceans. Failing to act urgently to halt biodiversity loss will lead to ecological collapse and will not allow us to comply with the Paris Agreement. Colombia endorsed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, a set of 10 comprehensive commitments to stop the loss of biodiversity by 2030. We also joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People to protect 30% of the lands and seas of the planet and to promote nature-based solutions. As a mega-diverse country, Colombia will host the pre-COP of biodiversity in August, aiming to translate these commitments into goals, targets, and indicators. To conclude, I would like to stress that the United Nations must play a critical role to make this possible. We need to scale up our efforts, enhance the visibility of the process, strengthen the political support for transformative initiatives, and integrate solutions to protect nature. You can count on Colombia's full field of support to achieve these purposes. For us, biodiversity is synonym of commitment, prosperity, and future. Let us jointly engage on the basis of these three concepts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And may I now welcome Her Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Bhutan, Ambassador Doma Tshering.
Thank you, Ligia. Mr. President of the General Assembly, Madam Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, dear colleagues. Bhutan is pleased to join hands with valued partners and outstanding company to extend to you all a warm welcome to this high-level event on raising ambition for nature. The co-hosts are grateful to the PGA and the Deputy SG for graciously accepting our invitation to join this important conversation. Friends, 2021 is a pivotal year for nature and climate. As we prepare for the Conference of Parties of the 3 Rio Conventions, as well as forthcoming key engagements in New York, we have the opportunity to galvanize international action to step up global ambition for nature, climate, and people. The current state of planetary emergency demonstrates that unless we reverse biodiversity loss, ecosystem degradation, resource depletion, and climate change by 2050, we risk irreversible damage to the world as we know it, and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals will remain far beyond our grasp. The COVID-19 pandemic was nature's way of ringing the alarm bells, telling us that our way of life has reached the precipice of sustainability. It is a clear reminder that humans have a moral obligation to both current and future generations to preserve planet Earth. Throughout the centuries, Bhutanese have revered the natural environment as the source of all life, from the highest echelons of government to the nomadic yak herders living above 4,000 meters. Our development pathway, guided by gross national happiness, has been defined by the recognition that planetary health is indivisible from human health, prosperity, and happiness. At the UN Biodiversity Summit last year, my Prime Minister was proud to join the ranks of 83 other heads of governments to endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, committing to take actions to achieve the vision of living in harmony with nature by 2050. From maintaining 70% of land under forest cover, designating over 50% of our territory as protected parks and biological corridors, to stepping up integrated watershed and wetland management, as well as protecting catchment areas, these measures provide the means to harness the power of nature to adapt to climate change, build resilience, prevent biodiversity loss, and offer sustainable livelihood alternatives for communities. Nature-based solutions are integral to maintaining Bhutan's climate neutrality. They are also central to stewardship of our fragile mountain landscape and glaciers, which serves as water towers of South Asia, upon which billions in the region depend for food production and livelihood. Excellencies, the magnitude of challenges at hand is far beyond the ability of any single country to tackle, and the efforts of developing countries must also be supported by strengthening access to financing and with scaled-up investments. Only a more resilient, nature-positive, and carbon-neutral world will secure a better future for current and future generations. This calls for firm commitment to address our shared responsibilities, unstinting solidarity and international cooperation, underpinned by effective multilateralism. On behalf of the co-hosts, I welcome you all once again and look forward to our discussions on these vital issues this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, may I now invite the head of the European Union delegation, His Excellency Ambassador Olive Skoog.
Good morning, good evening. Thank you very much, Ligia, and dear Deputy Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, colleagues. I want to say how proud the European Union is to co-host this event with many partners from across the globe and with a terrific list of speakers. Thank you, all of you, for lending your high office to constantly push for higher awareness and higher ambition. The Secretary General has said it many times, we must finally take the necessary decisions to make peace with nature. That means addressing the triple independent crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution together, and with equally high ambition. Nature-based solutions, as both Guillermo and Doma has said, need to be at the heart of our work for enhancing our resilience to future shocks, for health and food security, and for economic development. Here in New York, we must make ambition on climate and biodiversity an integral part of our ambition for sustainable development, not just in discussions of the 2030 agenda, but in the outcomes of our negotiations and our actions on the ground. The newly agreed Financing for Development outcome document is a start and a step in the right direction. We need to mobilize much more resources for nature, public and private. This would be most logical in the context of the recovery from a pandemic with such clear zoonotic origins. We have two very important COPs ahead of us in Kunming and in Glasgow. We count on the leadership of China and the United Kingdom to ensure that all parties increase ambition. You can count on the European Union's support for achieving COP outcomes that finally set us on the right track towards peace with nature. We also invite all heads of state and government who have not yet done so to endorse the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, demonstrating their commitment to transformational change. The science is clear. We have a choice of whether we follow science or not. We often speak about forks in the road and existential choices. Passing irreversible tipping points cannot be undone. The decisions we take or do not take this year and for this decade have an impact for all generations to come. So we either raise ambition and delivery, or we deservedly lose legitimacy in their eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite our keynote speakers, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the General Assembly, and Her Excellency Ms. Amina J. Mohammed, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Mr. Bozkır, may I invite you to give your keynote remarks, please.
Excellencies, Madam Deputy Secretary General, Madam Assistant Secretary General, dear colleagues, and my predecessor, the PGA of the 74th session. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. I commend the like-minded group on biodiversity for organizing this discussion and for continuing to raise awareness on this critical issue. We are here today because we already know how important this issue is. So you will forgive me for skipping the facts and figures on extinction rates and biodiversity loss. The plain truth is we have not done enough to protect the environment, and we need to do more. The question we should be asking now is, what are the most pressing and urgent actions needed now for transformative change? On this, I would stress three key points. The first is, we must continue to make progress on the road to Kunming and the goal of a 2020 framework on biodiversity. Member states clearly expressed support for this in September 2020 at the UN's first Biodiversity Summit, and to the Leaders' Pledge that was released concurrently. This call has only been emphasized in the period since. We must continue to push for action and utilize the upcoming COP-level summits on climate, biodiversity and desertification, land degradation and drought to underscore the importance of this issue. All these areas are interconnected and we cannot miss the opportunity to tie them together. I'm pleased to say that the General Assembly is continuing its effort to build political support through a series of high-level meetings and dialogues. The first on water has already taken place. We have more coming up on oceans and on deforestation, land degradation, and drought. The second, we must utilize the opportunity presented by COVID-19 and the largest socioeconomic recovery the world has ever undertaken to strengthen our relationship with the natural world. For all its tragedy, COVID has also opened a window of possibility in the public and political spheres and given us the chance to push for transformational change. Let us use this and ensure that our recovery efforts are guided by the goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda and help protect both life on land and life below water. And finally, we must undertake broad efforts to raise awareness of this issue. While each of us here is aware of the interconnected nature of these issues, most people have little knowledge of zoonotic diseases or extinction rates, or of the linkages between climate, desertification, and biodiversity. This is an oversight that will harm our progress. If there is one lesson which the COVID pandemic has taught us, it is the interconnected nature of the world in which we live in, and that the challenges this throws up shows that we simply cannot address environmental, social, and economic issues in silos. Biodiversity loss and the loss of ecosystems are not merely environmental issues. These losses affect our health, our wealth, and our resilience. Some estimates put the value of ecosystem services at more than $33 trillion. Clearly, we must move to tackle these issues together, and everyone must understand why. Given this, I commend the launch of the Natural Capital Accounting and Valuation of Ecosystem Services project by the UN Statistics Division and DESA. This will help to measure our wealth, not simply by our economic output, but by the wealth of our natural capital as well. I ask that as results become available, we work with the UN Department of Global Communications and partners to ensure broad and creative public awareness and advocacy to share our findings and back up our response. Dear colleagues, I thank you again for the opportunity to speak and commend you for continuing to carry on this conversation and to raise ambition ahead of Kunming. I wish you the best in your discussions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those very inspiring remarks. May I now invite Her Excellency Ms. Amina J. Mahmood, the Deputy Secretary General, to give her keynote remarks.
Okay. Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. I would like to first of all begin by thanking our permanent representatives from Colombia, from Bhutan, and the European Union for co-hosting this really important meeting at a timely opportunity. Nature is the foundation of our societies and economies. Raising ambition for our planet is raising ambition for people. Exposure to air and water pollution claims at least 9 million lives every year, and 40% of the population is negatively affected by the loss and degradation of the soil that feeds us. Raising ambition for nature is at the core of ensuring an inclusive and sustainable recovery, and a necessary condition to deliver the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. The IMF has found that every dollar invested in ecosystem conservation yields 7 times more in the wider economy compared to subsidies to conventional agriculture. Setting a new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is an opportunity for us to demonstrate greater ambition. As the intergovernmental negotiations will soon resume, we have absolutely no time to lose. But ambition is also required in deploying more broad-based approaches that engage stakeholders across the breadth and levels of government and society. I see three concrete actions that could raise ambition for nature. First, that the 2030 agenda as our guide, we need to transform our food, water, transport, and energy systems, leveraging the opportunities provided by sustainable consumption and production to ensure that no one is left behind. Second, we need ambitions for nature to be matched with nature-positive investments from domestic and international public and private sources. The total annual international public finance for nature is significantly less than the subsidies leading to its degradation. This is not sustainable, and it doesn't make economic sense. Third, we need to place nature at the heart of socioeconomic decision-making. To do this, we have to correct the shortcomings of governance and in markets. I'm encouraged by the breakthrough last month at the UN Statistical Commission, which adopted an international standard of accounting for nature. The new system of environment economic accounting, ecosystem accounting, will ensure that the natural capital, our forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems, are recognized in economic reporting, and that our natural assets are maintained similar to our economic assets. Within the UN system, we are committed to a common approach for integrating biodiversity and nature-based solutions for sustainable development across our policy and our programming. This will mean integrating nature across our work in support of human rights and peaceful societies, a green, inclusive, and just economic recovery, and strengthened systems of governance, rule of law, and justice. We're also supporting the establishment of the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, working with many financial institutions, businesses, and member states. This task force will catalyze shifting of financial flows so that they become nature positive. We welcome the commitments and pledges from member states, civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, and local communities, especially our youth, the private sector. Such commitments, including the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, that brings together over 80 member states to raise ambition on reversing biodiversity loss by 2030, are critical for driving momentum and raising ambition on the road ahead to COP15 of the Convention on Biodiversity in October in Kunming. We are at a make or break moment. 2021 provides us a unique opportunity to halt the rapid loss of biodiversity and ecosystem degradation while addressing the climate emergency. Success at the 3 upcoming Rio Convention COPs, as well as the Food Systems Summit, would be a strong signal to the world of how multilateralism can deliver. We need a comprehensive and coherent approach which builds on promoting linkages and synergies. The COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of the multiple costs when we wage war on nature. Making peace with nature is the defining task of the 21st century. If we are to ensure a sustainable future for all, then raising ambition for nature and delivering on this ambition must be a top priority for all of us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, DSG, for those very valuable remarks. And before I go on to the next segment, which is towards the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, I would like to thank in advance for your presence and that of the President of the General Assembly, because I know you have to leave during that segment. So we're very honored to have you both today. Thank you very much. Let me then introduce the next segment, which is towards the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And to set us off, we have Her Excellency Ms. Elizabeth Marema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we have the Ambassador of the PR of China, His Excellency Zhang Jun, the host of CBD COP15. We also have I'm sorry, I seem to have, apologies there. My paper has just flown.
Egypt.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to get everyone together. We have Mr. Mohamed Fateh Ahmed Edris, the permanent representative of Egypt and the host of the CBD COP14. And after that, we will have the Canadian ambassador, Mr. Bob Ray, and Mr. Van Avre. So let me first turn to Ms. Elizabeth Marema, the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biodiversity. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lydia. Excellencies, President of the General Assembly, who was just with us, our Deputy Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by offering my sincere thanks to our hosts for convening this virtual high-level event and for inviting the CBD Secretariat to contribute to this discussion. Such a high-level support for ambitious biodiversity action certainly bodes very well for the global effort to adopt a robust post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework later this year at the 15th Conference of the Parties. The emerging global framework will be a compendium to the Paris Climate Agreement, but will focus squarely and specifically on nature and will include goals, targets, and policy directions to guide our global society over the next 3 decades. The need could not be more urgent. Just in September last year, the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook was released. It outlined 8 major transitions needed to halt nature's accelerating decline. It also provided the final report card on the 2010 Aichi biodiversity targets and showed that our collective efforts had fallen short of the mark, with only 6 of the 20 world's 20 goals being partially achieved by the 2020 deadline. Fortunately, parties have not become disheartened. At our conference of the parties, the last one, 14, the parties assessed the lessons learned from the Aichi and agreed to take bold action with more inclusive approach. They called for a new global framework that will require universal implementation and engagement of all stakeholders and will incentivize their explicit contribution to its global goals, including engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities, regional and city governments, private sector, NGOs, women, youth, and society at large. They also called for swift implementation, since significant national level infrastructure, such as the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, are already in place. Indeed, since the first negotiation session held in Nairobi in 2019 August, parties have been actively building lessons from Aichi into the emerging framework, supported by significant commitments from the business sector and finance, as well as the subnational and local governments through the Edinburgh process. Notably, the UN Summit on Biodiversity, resulting in the Leaders' Pledge for Nature and a shared commitment to put biodiversity, climate, and environment at the heart of the COVID-19 recovery strategies and investments, as well as national and international development and cooperation. An updated zero draft of the framework, prepared under the guidance of our co-chairs, was produced in August last year. In March this year, we broke new grounds by convening the first virtual informal meetings of the Convention subsidiary bodies, which are expected to provide inputs into the draft framework. The first virtual formal meetings of these bodies will be held next month in May and in June. Recreating a formal negotiation session in a virtual format presents many new challenges, all of which call for determination, flexibility, and of course, patience. However, in the light of the diligence we have seen so far in the past year, I'm confident that we will find a way forward together. The coming days will present a number of important opportunities for the international community to shape the future of biodiversity conservation as we work towards an ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Together, we can enable our societies to build a better world where every person has dignity and prosperity and can live in harmony with nature. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mrema, for that very strong message. May I now turn to His Excellency Ambassador Zhang Jun, the PR of China and the host of COP15, CBD COP15.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Dear President Bozkir, dear DSG Amina, Executive Secretary Mrema, Excellencies and dear colleagues. I also wish to join other colleagues by thanking the co-hosts for convening this very, very important dialogue. Protecting nature concerns the future of mankind. Building a beautiful home is a dream shared by all. The COVID-19 pandemic tells us that man and nature are in one community. It's imperative that the international community uphold multilateralism, strengthen solidarity and cooperation, and jointly tackle challenges such as biodiversity loss, climate change, and the marine environment pollution to realize global sustainable development. China attaches great importance to ecological protection. We believe clear water and green mountains are the most valuable assets. We have incorporated the protection of ecosystem into our overall development plan. As the host of COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, China is making every effort in preparation for the conference. Speaking at the Biodiversity Summit last September, President Xi Jinping invited world leaders and heads of international organizations to the beautiful city of Kunming for COP15 to discuss biodiversity conservation. Due to the pandemic, COP15 has been rescheduled for October 11th to the 24th, 2021. The theme of the conference is ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth. And it will consider and adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which will set the direction for global biodiversity conservation. China will also host the second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference in Beijing in October. All parties are welcomed to participate in the two conferences at the highest level possible. The preparatory work for COP15 is well underway. China has agreed with the Secretariat of the Convention on the Host Country Agreement, according to which the conference will be held through both in-person and virtual meetings. A preliminary program is ready for the high-level meeting to be held by the Chinese government, and 8 parallel events, including the Ecological Civilization Forum, will be held to discuss the importance of enhancing biodiversity conservation from different perspectives. At the same time, the parties are having consultations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Now COP15 is just a few months away. China looks forward to working with all parties to ensure a fruitful COP15 to inject a new momentum into global environmental governance. For that, we need to give high political importance to COP15. Secretary General Guterres has repeatedly stressed that this is a critical time to reshape our relationship with nature, and humanity needs a healthy planet to achieve sustainable development. Biodiversity is the foundation for human survival and development. We should explore a path of harmonious coexistence between man and nature through COP15. We should also make sure that synergies will be formed among COP15, COP26 of UNFCCC, and the second Global Sustainable Transport Conference, and other important conferences to promote sustainable development across the globe. President Xi Jinping had a very good discussion in this regard with President Macron and Chancellor Merkel at the recent virtual summit, which provided strong guidance for our future cooperation. We need to accelerate consultations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The framework is expected to be the major outcome of COP15 and will set the targets and the pathway for global biodiversity conservation for the coming decade. The framework should reflect the three major objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner, be both ambitious and practical, and promote a better recovery from the pandemic. It should fully address the concerns of developing countries, strengthen support for them in terms of finance, technology, and capacity building, and build a more just and equitable biodiversity governance system in which each country can do its part. For that purpose, we also need to take concrete actions to protect biodiversity. There is only one Earth. We must protect the ecological environment as much as possible, and we take care of as much as we take care of our eyes. We must take environmental issues seriously at all times, not only during meetings and conferences. In recent years, China has been working hard to build a beautiful country and put its 1.4 billion people on a path of green development. This is a significant contribution to the development of global ecological civilization. And all countries should fulfill their commitments to reverse biodiversity loss and ecological degradation. Irresponsible acts such as discharging nuclear wastewater into the sea must be stopped before it's too late to avoid ecological catastrophes whose impacts can never be undone. Dear colleagues, advancing biodiversity conservation and global environmental governance requires the unremitting efforts of all countries. China will continue to earnestly fulfill its obligations and play its role as the host and the presidency of COP15. We will strengthen communication and cooperation with the Secretariat of the Convention and other countries to make COP15 a successful conference of milestone significance in a bid to build a beautiful world of harmony of all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that very hopeful message and for the very strong leadership that you've been showing. Let me now turn to His Excellency Mr. Manuel, the PR of Egypt and the host of CBD COP14.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and high appreciation to His Excellency the PGA and Her Excellency DSG. And let me commend the initiative of the organizers to convene this event and to kick off the super year of nature. Indeed, perhaps more so than ever, the experiences we have all had in the previous year with regard to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic are testimony to the centrality of the condition of nature to the human condition. Both are really directly interrelated and interlinked, the condition of nature and the human condition. We face multiple challenges, such as biodiversity loss, the degradation of our lands, the scarcity of our water resources, and the worsening climate crisis. We have numerous opportunities before us in this year to set common objectives, high objectives, to stop and reverse this onslaught on nature. At the center of these efforts is the ongoing effort to draft the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework within the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity. As the president of the 14th session of the Conference of the Parties of the CBD, Egypt has taken several steps in ensuring that our work on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework sets consensual aims and objectives that overcome the adversity we faced with respect to the shortcomings in achieving the Aichi targets. Likewise, we must allow this important process to proceed without undue interference from other initiatives that, despite being well-meaning attempts to set high standards for nature preservation, yet ultimately might undermine the integrity of the CBD post-2020 global post-2020 biodiversity framework process. We look forward to the upcoming 15th session of the CBD COP due to be held in China, where we hope to be able to adopt the new framework. Moreover, we are also recognize the need to move beyond this siloed treatment of the issues concerning nature. The lessons of the previous year had taught us that we cannot fully separate our work streams, and as such, we proposed the need for synergies between the three Rio environmental conventions. Indeed, this was an issue that Egypt had called for prior to the onset of the pandemic, where in CBD COP14, held in Sharm el-Sheikh in 2018, we launched the Rio Convention's Coherent Implementation Initiative. We are convinced that such an initiative is an attempt, as an important way forward, aiming at addressing the interrelated challenges of climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity loss, using ecosystem-based approaches for dealing with the complex issues of deteriorating nature. The initiative aims to ensure that a coherent approach in implementing these instruments will promote the effective coordination of activities among the implementation institutions of the international, national, and local levels. It will also help optimize resource use and improve environmental performance and streamline operations while increasing means of implementation support. It also encourages collaboration at the national level among the national focal points of the conventions and related environmental agreements, as well as with the important instruments such as the Global Environmental Facility. This linkage will aim to address current knowledge gap in the implementation of ecosystem-based approaches to gain a better understanding of the role and potential. It's indeed high time to have high ambitions in stopping this degradation of our nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Idris, for those wonderful remarks. I have the great pleasure now to invite His Excellency, the Ambassador of Canada, Mr. Bob Ray. Mr.
Thank you so much. It's very good to be with all of you, and it's my pleasure to join the Deputy Secretary General, the President of the General Assembly, my colleagues from China and from Egypt. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to be saying just a couple of things before I introduce my colleague, Mr. Van Have, who is going to be talking about the steps we're going to take to get to a better process going forward. The points I want to make is, first of all, and many speakers have said it, I just want to emphasize it, nature is our home. Nature is our ally on climate change. And it would be a good idea if we stopped destroying our home, because it's the only home we have. And I think it's really important that we understand the seriousness of the challenge. In that regard, I'm very pleased to be able to share with you news that is hot off the press, as we say. Our Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland announced yesterday that Canada is committing 17.6 billion to make sure that we do actually achieve the 25% target for lands and oceans by 2025, and that we'll get to 30% by 2030. So the money's in the budget, and we're ready to roll on that. That's very important. Final thing I want to just emphasize is that we see a particular role in our country, and we say this as we're entering into the 20th session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, that Indigenous peoples are really the carriers of ancestral knowledge and wisdom about biodiversity. And we think there's an extraordinary opportunity ahead for us, certainly in Canada, but we think around the world, to work with Indigenous communities on helping us to achieve these critical goals. We are deeply committed now moving forward to working with our Chinese host on COP15 and to working with all the community to develop an ambitious post-2020 Global Diversity Framework. On this subject, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Basil van Havre, who's the co-chair of the open-ended working group that is going to be working on this subject. Since 2019, Mr. van Havre, who has nearly 3 decades of conservation experience working in Canada's Environment Department, has been hard at work with his colleague and co-chair from Uganda, Mr. Francis Ogwal, in the development of the post-20 GBF. Basil, thank you so much for joining us. And now I hand the mic over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Ray. President, Deputy, Excellencies, colleagues, friends, I've been asked to say a few words and talk about where the performance of the previous frameworks and talk a little bit about the role your assembly can play and can help. This is with great pleasure that I'm able to do that. I will highlight 3 points in terms of the challenge that affected the previous round. One, and that's probably the number one, it was seen as the framework for environment minister, the framework for the CBD focal points. And there was challenges in engaging others, ministers of finance, ministers of housing and infrastructures, transports. I'll talk about some of the solution there. The second one was the lack of measurable targets. Ambassador Ray talked about the protection of land, and we had that target 11, around 17% of land and 10% of sea, and that was the only one that gathered really attention because that was one of the very few one that was measurable. Can we get more of those? Can those get more attention from our political leaders? Certainly. And then finally, the previous framework was set as an aspirational framework. And by definition, aspirational frameworks are hard to reach. That presents a challenge. So now let's turn a little bit to what we can do and how we can work together to get the success you've all have been talking so eloquently about. We want to make this framework a framework for all. So go well beyond environment ministry. Engage not only a whole of government, and I see colleagues that will be talking about business, about other multilateral funding agencies. So we need to create a framework that engage all. We're talking here about the convergence of the various agenda. And several of you have been talking about the triple crisis. Crisis for health, crisis for climate, and a crisis for nature. We will not be successful as a society, as a community, if we're not successful in those 3. And in fact, addressing one is addressing all. If we're doing a good job on the protection and conservation of land and sea, we will be contributing to mitigation, and we will also reduce the risk for pandemia. So definitively, there is some convergence of the various conventions, and that's where permanent representative in New York, your group, is coming into play. Nations have set very clearly their goals through the Leaders' Pledge and many others. Now is the time to bring them together. We do have a system, Sustainable Development Goals. And you, through your assembly, will be looking at that through various means, including the high-level political forum. So let's try to make sure that we have a system of Sustainable Development Goals that enable to capture what biodiversity contributes to the equation, but also see how the other conventions are also contributing. We in biodiversity will not be successful if our colleagues working on chemical convention, on climate change, on others will not be successful. You have a very important roles to play with us and to help us. In particular, and then what does that mean in terms of actual action? Through various conversation, informal at this point in time, but hopefully formal at some point, we are starting to build a roadmap for the convergence between the climate change and the Nature Convention. How are we going to be using the various events? Some of you have talked about them. The General Assembly that is coming, then the Food Summit. Particularly, if we are looking at the various system change that we're going to be looking at, one that is going to be the most affected and will experience the most profound change is our agri-food system and associated industry. How we can capitalize on the Food Summit to put an impetus behind those change, engage our colleagues from the agriculture ministries, and have the type of level of change we're looking for. Keep in mind, colleagues, that we're not talking about a darker future. We're talking about a brighter future, one that will feed the planet, that will feed a greater number of people with a smaller footprint, with a better quality of life and health. What's not to like about that? The question is how we're going to be managing and rolling up our sleeve to get from where we are today to where we need to be. In conclusion, count on our dedication. Francis and I will work tirelessly with you to guide the various parties through the negotiation, and we will be looking forward to work with our Chinese host of the COP15 to deliver a successful biodiversity framework. I am confident, like the tree behind me, that springs will always bring us the strengths of nature and the beauty of blooming. Thank you very much. Back to you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Avre. Not just for the synergies that you made, but also for the very hopeful future that you have portrayed. So now we turn to the next segment of this event. But before I do that, I would kindly request people who want to request the floor to put in their requests in the chat. But now it gives me great pleasure to invite Ms. Kani Vignaraja, Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator, and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific of the UNDP. Kani, the floor is yours to moderate the next session. Okay.
Thank you, Lihia. And Excellencies, it's been amazing listening to you, and I'm delighted to continue this discussion on raising ambition for nature. And, you know, all of us through these past 14 months, we have seen the unprecedented chaos and crisis that COVID has brought on our world. And while the lockdowns did allow penguins to stroll our streets of Cape Town and tens of thousands of flamingos to take over Mumbai, we also saw that global human development, which was on course, is now going to decline for the first time in an entire generation. And we are also very aware that the pressure that we are putting on our planet, and which risks getting worse as countries now race to recover from the pandemic, is no less than a clear and present danger. If I look at UNDP's 2020 Human Development Report, it showed that no country has yet achieved high human development without putting immense strain on the planet. And we know that it's going to take us, it seems, 1.6 Earths to maintain the world's current living standards. So I think the need, as all of you have said in this previous segment, to completely rethink and reinvent our economies and ourselves to be able to be more aligned with nature seems to be a no-brainer. Then why is it so hard to make the case heard and the change happen? So today we have an opportunity to hear from an amazing group of leaders on what may be helping some nations and some communities to recover and to reset development pathways towards something much, much better. And also, therefore, for the rest of us, what we need to do a whole lot more of. So let me kickstart this next, the chat that we're going to have. And I'm going to put some short questions to our panelists. They each have 3 minutes to respond in this first round. And if they give us then the time, we can go into another round. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Eva Zabe, Executive Director of Business for Nature. Eva, we know leaders in the Business for Nature Coalition have been leading the way in sustainability and best practice and setting the bar higher now and hoping others will join. Knowing we will need to do so much more on private investment in nature-based solutions, what is your advice based on the experience and what you've seen on how we can incentivize more private investment and build the business case better? Over to you.
Thank you so very much for the kind invitation and warm greetings to you all, Excellencies. You know, I had prepared some points to share, but I have a really wonderful problem. All of the previous distinguished speakers have already raised them. The need to take an integrated and urgent action to tackle climate, nature, health, and social inequality together. You have already demonstrated the political leadership we need and the fact that we need to not only transition, but urgently transform our economies and societies. So you asked me what we can do now to incentivize and scale and speed up the action and the investments from business and finance. And in my view, there are really 2 big levers to focus on. The first is the business and finance action itself. And the second is that policy ambition that will in turn accelerate business action even further. So the business momentum and leadership on nature and biodiversity has increased significantly over the past 18 months. Leading companies now recognize that their future success depends on protecting, restoring, and sustainably using natural resources. And the good news is that now there are business opportunities worth $10 trillion that could generate nearly 400 million jobs, according to the World Economic Forum. So hundreds of companies are already making commitments and starting to take action on nature and acting in different ways. Just a few examples. Unilever has committed to a deforestation-free supply chain by 2023, just a couple years away. And they've committed to protect and regenerate 1.5 million hectares of land, forests, and oceans by 2030. Walmart has set a goal of being carbon neutral without offsets by 2040. Companies like Anglian Water and Suez are using natural infrastructure to treat wastewater using wetlands instead of man-made water filtration plants. The finance sector is also mobilizing efforts, for example, through the Finance for Biodiversity Pledge, and BNP Paribas includes natural capital risks in some of its investment decisions. So these examples are great, but they are fragmented and together are still not enough. And that's why we need the increased policy ambition. For the first time ever, more than 700 companies, including the finance sector, are supporting the Nature is Everyone's Business call to action, urging governments to adopt policies now to reverse nature loss in this decade. The Leaders' Pledge for Nature is an amazing initiative, demonstrating government leadership, and now it needs to be translated in policy and concrete implementation by all, including by business and finance. And that includes increasing the current ambition in the CBD post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is this is our opportunity to adopt a transformative agreement at a global level. We need a stronger mission to be nature positive by 2030, which would be that equivalent of the 1.5 degrees global goal for nature. We need strong targets that are actionable by business. We've just heard the clear leadership from all the previous speakers. And I'm here to gladly share too that there is also real appetite from leading business and finance to step up their efforts too. No one can do this alone, but we can all do this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. And it's always good when you're able to say that, well, people before me have already said this, and then reaffirm and provide the strong illustrations that you did, because certainly I was listening to some of our PR speak in the previous segment, and we're hearing the same line. And as you said, together this can be achieved. So I'm going to now head over to Chad, and it is such a pleasure to introduce Hindu Ibrahim, environmental activist of the pastoralist Mboro community and founder of the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad. Hindu, given the reality of the pandemic and the mounting evidence suggesting that deforestation and biodiversity loss have enabled the emergence of zoonotic diseases, safeguarding the role of IPLCs as protectors of biodiversity has gained even greater urgency. Are we hearing you? Have IPLCs sustainably used and managed biodiversity? And given that they play such a strong role, how can these practices be better showcased, supported, and expanded? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kunming, and hi everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be with all of you in this panel. I think you say the response in your questions, the first questions, of course. It is clear for us, this pandemic gives us a same goals. When you protect nature, she will protect you back. And that's what indigenous peoples are doing for centuries. That's how we build our indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, by knowing where we can put our feet in order to protect ourselves. For example, in my indigenous communities who are Mboro pastoralists, we know that where we can take our cattle in order to do not be in the species that can transmit a disease. So when we take them to another place, that means we are protecting ourselves to do not get contracting any disease that coming from outside. This is why it is so important when we are designing this new framework of the biodiversity at the COP15. We need to put indigenous peoples in the center. And I also joining the first panelist to say, I'm very happy because Amina mentioned that, Elizabeth mentioned that, we need indigenous peoples to be in the centers. Why? Because we are also protecting 80% of the world's biodiversity. Even we are 5% of the world populations. When you go to the indigenous people's place in Amazon, you can find it's more diverse than a natural park. So how we do that? Because we know how to keep balance between the species of the nature. When the report show we lost the 60% of the world's biodiversity, it is a reality for indigenous peoples. It is not a numbers or a report, because we are living with them, we are seeing them. It is our food, it is our supermarket, it is everything, it is our identity. So when we lose one of the species, we are losing a piece of our language. We are losing a piece of our identity. And that's why COVID response must also include indigenous peoples. They leaving no one behind must apply to all what we are taking as decisions, because we are the peoples of the planet. But coming back to your second questions, I think it is not how indigenous peoples can help. I think the good question is, indigenous peoples are not the one who is destroying the nature. So there is two questions that I wanted to put quickly to you. First one is, are you ready to stop your destruction of the nature? It is your way of living who destroy the nature, who destroy the ecosystem, who bring the climate change. Let me give you a quick examples. In my community also, in the Sahel regions, we have an agriculture that is already net zero emissions. We indigenous peoples, we respect the Paris Agreement, not in 2050, not in 2030, and we respect the biodiversity, not 30 by 30, but we're doing 100 by 100, because we reduce the emission, we protect all the land. is, do you want to help and help indigenous peoples? Because we can teach you how to protect the nature. The second question is, do we indigenous peoples want to help you? Because it is appear that you need capacity building. You need my Amazon or my Pacific brothers and sisters, indigenous people's knowledge to how to restore the forest, how to protect the coral reef. So what we need, the answer is to these questions, yes, we are ready to help you. But we have some conditions, and those conditions, I wanted all the PRR to listen to it and to implement it in the home capitals, not in New York sitting there. Firstly, you need to respect the rights of indigenous peoples. Recognize it and respect it, because if we protect 80% of the world biodiversity, that means our rights are very important to protect the biodiversity. Secondly, you need to include indigenous peoples into the decision making. If we protect 80%, we must take also a decisions. My great grandmother, she didn't went to school, but she can have PhD, please. Because she can predict the weather, because she can predict the food insecurity, because she knows how to save her people, how to protect the nature. And the third and the last one, you need to give us access to the resources. And those resources, we need to develop our own project where we can develop our knowledge and implement them as contribution to the biodiversity restorations. And we need to do that all together in partnership. That's what I have to offer to you. If you are ready, indigenous peoples around the world are ready to restore all the biodiversity. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Hindu. I think your words resonate very strong. And I think they must make us feel uncomfortable, because it is in that discomfort that we change our behaviors, we listen better, and we ask what more can we do to do better ourselves to work towards this common goal. So thank you for that. Now, our next speaker in this chat has been a long-term visionary also in the environmental movement, and for many years has kept everyone on their toes. It is a pleasure to introduce Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, CEO and Chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility. Carlos Manuel, you've said many times that to achieve a better, more resilient recovery, we just have to prioritize nature as the foundation on which all economic and social activity rests and depends. There's no other way. So if you were to pick 2-3 top-end actions to make this a reality, whether through the lens of Jeff or outside of it, what would you say those were?
Well, thank you so much, Kenny, for your kind words. And it is a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. And also a great pleasure to share the panel with my dear colleagues, Eva and Hindu. And you make me a very tough question. But yes, nature has to be in the center of all economic activities. And most importantly, nature should be in the center of our principles and values. Two elements here are key and can complement very well with what Eva and Hindu just mentioned. If we want to succeed by 2030 in having a net positive nature, we need to understand that we need to solve two issues. One is the market failure. Unfortunately, our this neoclassic economic model aims for unlimited growth without recognizing planetary boundaries. And that is not happening. We pollute the environment, and that is not reflected in how we assess economic growth at the national or at the corporate level. So we need to deal with this market failure. We need to fully internalize the negative externalities of our production and consumption system. At the same time that we should reward financially the positive externalities, making the conservation and wise use of natural resources are very positive. A good example of this challenge is how do we shift the tax burden from taxpayers into polluters? And if we do this, we may be overcoming this huge market failure, and we may be putting nature in the front of our economic activities and our businesses. The second big challenge is related to another failure, which I call it the institutional failure. We have organized our societies in governments, and governments are run by institutions, and we are the end result of our institutions. Unfortunately, our institution has proven to be not good stewards of nature and our natural capital. And we need to recognize that the redesign of our institutional framework in public sector is key in our aspiration for sustainability. We cannot expect to do the leap forward in terms of our sustainability objectives with the same institutional framework that in first place has contributed in creating the sustainable consumption and production pattern that we have. And we need to go towards a more landscape, seascape, institutional framework approaches where we can overcome this sectoral vision, this sectoral budgeting, and avoid the conflict, the traditional conflict in the management of natural resources with ministries, within ministers of our environment, ministers of agriculture, minister of environment, and ministers of energy and mining. We redesigning the institutional framework, recognizing that we have an issue, which I call the institutional failure, is important. And finally, both things, addressing the market failure, addressing the institutional failure will help us generate something which is key in this context, which is more policy coherence within our development policies. Unfortunately, all countries today invest more public financial resources in activities that contribute to climate change, contribute to social inequity, and contribute to the loss of natural resources than what we invest in nature conservation. So the need for more policy coherence, the need for increased mobilization of financial resources from all sources, but particularly from public sources, is key to achieve this goal. This transition can be made and must be made in the context of the 2030 agenda. And this is why the work that Basile Van Harve and Francis Ockwald, co-chairs of the Open-End Working Group, with the support of the Secretariat, CBD Secretariat, is extremely important because we already have human development related goals and targets, the SDGs. We got the Paris Agreement, and the missing piece that is there will be achieved hopefully in COP15 by generating a compelling, ambitious post-2020 framework for the CBD. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos Manuel. And you reminded us very well that we are our institutions, and hence have to take on and own the failures of these institutions, and to keep thinking that the same institutions over and over again somehow are going to come and change an outcome without changing the fundamentals of those institutions. I think that's a very, that hits home very directly. And maybe it's my privilege to call on next a ambassador who reminds us often about this issue. His Excellency, Dr. Walton Webson, PR to the UN of Antigua and Barbuda. On behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, Excellency, you have said often that if we are going to do something very different for sustainability, we cannot, as governments, as societies, keep following those same policy, regulatory, fiscal choices. And the decisions made today could be the tipping points that save our planet. So Dr. Webson, if you had to put your money on a couple of big transformative changes that absolutely have to be undertaken to facilitate these tough transitions, particularly in SIDS, in your read, what would those be?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Fortunately, I'm not a gambling man, so I won't put a lot of money on anything. I want to first of all thank the co-chairs for organizing this very timely and very important meeting, and so early in the year in particular. I want to thank the President of the General Assembly for his presence and the DSG. Excellencies, the challenge before us is enormous, and the timing is yet again right, but we are at a point when we have to act. SIDS have already been strengthening biodiversity targets under the CDB through actions across other instruments, through well-planned, effective, and efficient mobilization of resources. There's a vast potential to reap co-benefits across all of these agendas. For example, in SIDS, in the Caribbean, the ecosystem-based adaptation approaches to climate change that are being utilized for coastal zone management is an area. The Pacific Islands states are exploring the collective vision of a blue Pacific, maximizing the socioeconomic benefits of oceans-based economies while conserving the ocean. That's another area. In the Indian Ocean, the Seychelles has conceived a sustainable ocean-based development pathway, and the Maldives has committed to a 5-year initiative to advance ocean protection and sustainably develop the blue economy. These are some of the areas. These efforts to consolidate available finite resources do not negate the urgent need for additional resources. And this remains the biggest challenge for the SIDS. Public financing, including concessional financing and ODA, are critical to rebuilding our ecosystem, our economies sustainably. But the commitment that have been realized are profoundly inadequate to change the direction. There is also a need to address the broader systematic issues of access to development finance that many of us SIDS continue to face, perhaps considering we need to consider new methods and new opportunities. The bottom line is, for the envisioned transition that sustainable pathways, global financial flows need to be made available and redirected accordingly. Let me turn to a couple of other things that we might look at. The Leaders' Pledge for Nature is intended to build political momentum to reach a robust outcome at the COP15. We heard a little bit about that earlier. We need to send a strong message to the world that we are not going to fail our planet. And we heard our sister from, I think, Chad speak about that. And SIDS are fully committed to halting and reversing biodiversity losses by 2030. Now, we need more ambitious commitment from countries in the spirit of the pledge, and we need these commitments to be translated into action urgently, including through sustainable recovery. Excellencies, we believe it is important for the new Global Biodiversity Framework to fully recognize and support the special cases of SIDS and the challenges we, as small states, face in halting biodiversity losses. Also, colleagues, taking into account the ambitious post-2020 framework that we have envisaged, it is important for developed countries to provide adequate and predictable funding for implementation. You see, there needs to be an overall and drastic increase in the new and additional funding channels to the global environmental facilities via its ongoing 8th replenishment process. My last point to the question is that we as SIDS also need to explore other relevant sources of financing to achieve these targets, noting the significant role that public and public grants-based funding play. Successful implementation is continuous on availability and access to required resources. SIDS need to have full support because, as was said earlier, we're not responsible for destroying. Very often in our small societies, we practice sustainable fishing, sustainable living, but often we are the recipient and the direct recipient of the damage that is done elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Webson, and I think you've again squarely put on the table for us that this has to be a collective effort, private and public, the redirecting of resources where it is needed most, and that some countries, particularly the smaller countries that are getting far left behind, need a different level of ambition and acceleration of action if it's to save whole nations in this charge. So on that note, let me turn to our last speaker, Ambassador Jonathan Allen, Charge d'Affaires of the UK to the UN. Ambassador Allen, you've heard our colleagues and the excellencies speak before on this huge agenda that is center table right now. Maybe we've been remiss in putting it so centrally and should have done so decades ago. But with such a large agenda on the table, what are for you in a country that has sought to mobilize governments and all the stakeholder groups, what are the most important areas where we have to accelerate our investments and our policy actions if we want to reverse biodiversity loss? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kani. And let me just say how glad I am to be part of this panel. That you mentioned the wide range of stakeholders that the UK is bringing together as COP26 president designate and in the G7 presidency seat. And this is the living, breathing example, isn't it? This panel of that sort of stakeholder collaboration. It's great to see so many delegations here today, and it's great to speak just after Ambassador Webson, who is a real leader here at the UN. So 2021 is a critical year, as we all know. We have the COP26 and G7 presidencies, of course, where we'll be doing what we can to bend the curve of biodiversity loss, tackle degradation, take the actions necessary to protect our planet. But we all know that the biodiversity and the climate crises are intrinsically linked. And so we have to be able to tackle those in an integrated way if we're going to achieve the 2030 goals. So we're working, of course, with the Rio presidencies, with our secretariats, and others to reinforce those linkages. I saw Ambassador Jun on your screen earlier, and of course China and the UK are working closely together on this issue, which is critical for all of us. On the question of ambitions, we think we have to set ambitious new targets. We would like to see, as the UK, a global biodiversity framework agreed at CBD COP15 that includes a new 30 by 30 target. So we protect at least 30% of global land and global ocean by 2030. We are leading on the Global Ocean Alliance. We're co-chairing a high ambition coalition for nature and people. And last year, I'm proud to say that we surpassed our 30% ocean target, and we're looking forward to supporting others. And I absolutely hear what's been said about finance. Of course, we have to match high ambition with the requisite finance. So we want to see parties significantly step up their finance for nature. We are rethinking our own approach in the UK. I'm looking forward to sharing with colleagues soon details on our own Dasgupta review. But meanwhile, we've committed $4.2 billion out of the existing $16 billion that we've made as a commitment to international climate finance. And we've committed that exclusively to protecting and restoring nature. And we encourage others similarly to earmark finance to protect ecosystems and promote biodiversity. Now, Aubrey said it was all about action, and he could not be more correct on that. I think we are very pleased about the Leaders' Pledge for Nature. We've got 85 leaders. We've got 80 non-state supporters. 85 leaders isn't bad, but we must do a lot better. And it can't just be words. We're all very good at words, particularly here at the United Nations. It's about deeds. That pledge, that Leaders' Pledge, brings together finance, trade, climate, terrestrial, marine commitments, deeds into one document, including increased protected areas, eliminating harmful land use, fisheries policies, clamping down on environmental crime, increasing biodiversity in NDCs, and of course, getting to net zero by mid-century. So we need to follow through to carry out those deeds. That will make a huge difference. And I say, let's be held to account. Let's hold each other to account as states and non-states, and let's sign everyone up. Let's encourage real leadership from our leaders. Thank you very much, Canny.
Thank you, Jonathan. So as we close this, I'm going to ask our 5 panelists. You've got 30 seconds, and you're going to give me one deed that is at the top of your list. You know, as we said, if we continue the way we are, and Eva, Hindu, you all spoke to this, Carlos, Manuel, we are going to have to look for another Earth, right? We're going to need close to 2 Earths to get on with the way we are producing and consuming. So not going to happen. So one deed that you feel is at the top of your list. So I'm going to go to Eva first, 30 seconds.
Thank you. All companies have to assess, commit, act, and then advocate for nature to be nature positive by 2030. Thank you.
And put their money where their mouth is, right?
100%. And with that, we need to redirect subsidies, increase green finance, but most importantly, green mainstream finance.
That's very true. Hindu, over to you.
Thank you, Eva, for this first one. You make it easier for me. So I think for me, I wanted to see the 2 COPs, biodiversity and climate change, making the same decisions, because on the ground, we don't have a land for climate differently and biodiversity differently. And the voices of indigenous peoples be in the center of the decision making.
I hope you got that, Lihia, and all our panelists. And now over, do we have Carlos Manuel with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah?
I'm here, Kenny. Thank you so much. We need to go today we subsidize pollution. So we need to do from subsidizing pollution to taxing pollution on all its forms, water pollution, air pollution, pollution with toxics, emissions. We need to really change the mindset. We need to shift the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters.
Thank you. I wish I could actually do this across all of you, because I can ask Ambassador Jun and Ambassador Mitch and Ambassador Mohammed Idris. I know all of them will have a deed that they want to put in to make it happen. But I'm now going to go to Dr. Webson. What would your one deed be that we need to push on? And I'm not asking you to put your money on the table. I took your point that you're not a gambling man.
I think we need to turn commitment urgently into to be translated into action. Given the rate at which our environment is deteriorating, we have to drive action at every level right now. Mine is very simple. We got to turn commitment into action urgently and drive that because we are losing the battle at this moment.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think that's a very clear message, and I hope comes through very strongly in what we've got to do next. Jonathan, last 30 seconds.
Well, for me, it's the 30 by 30. We all need to come together to commit to that commitment, of protecting 30% of global land and oceans by 2030. And it's a commitment that we can all take action towards. We can do it nationally, we can do it regionally, we can do it globally, and we can do it collectively. There's no reason for anyone not to make a contribution to it. And let's just do it.
Thank you all. And I think what has really come out on this, and let me use the term, which we often don't use in the UN, is what a radical shift is needed in terms of what defines progress, how we measure it, redirecting income and wealth. If we're truly going to look at well-being of both people and planet. And it is the one Earth we have. And it's up to us, it's on us to protect it and live with it. So on that, thank you so much for this opportunity to engage with you, and let me hand the floor back to Lihia.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Kani, and thank you to all the speakers for that wonderful session. Let me just quickly summarize the points again, Kani, because you said we should all be listening to it carefully. So let me mention them. Coherent actions by business, an understanding of land as being both common to nature as well as climate, and therefore protecting it, attacks on pollution and harms, making sure that we convert commitments into actions, and finally, the 30 by 30 commitment. So this is a fantastic opportunity to go into the next segment, which is very much the interactive discussion. And now I have the great pleasure of inviting the PR of France, His Excellency Ambassador de Rivière, as a co-host to speak. Ambassador, you're there, right? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to be part of this meeting that France is co-hosting with many great partners. As many have said, today is a key moment. We are already 6 months away from the United Nations Biodiversity Summit, and we have less than 6 months left before the COP. Through this journey, and while the world is hit by COVID-19, it is clearly our responsibility to take urgent action for biodiversity and to maintain the protection of nature as a priority of the political agenda. By endorsing the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, France and the other endorsers have sent a common signal to step up global ambition for nature, climate, and people. We must relentlessly recall that the well-being and the development of all our societies depend on our ability to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. The success of this initiative is in its way very encouraging. To succeed in this task, common actions and objectives between all countries and regions are needed. I will give you a few examples of collective and concrete actions on how we can deliver. First, it is of course essential to collectively agree on an ambitious framework during COP15 in Kunming. For this purpose, France supports the setting of ambitious targets and quantified objectives. We can base those objectives on the IPBES Global Assessment Report published in 2019. In addition, it is essential for France that the framework addresses important issues that I would like to list: supply chains, deforestation, agroecology, subsidies, convergence between climate and biodiversity finance, gender and indigenous peoples and local communities participation. France is also advocating for a robust implementation mechanism. Second, I would like to highlight the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, co-chaired by France and Costa Rica and by the UK as Ocean co-chair. This coalition brings together about 60 governments with a common goal: the protection of at least 30% of the planet's land and sea by 2030. The adoption of this objective at COP15 is one of our top priorities. Third, we have the collective responsibility to protect further the ocean and its biodiversity. We must adopt by the end of 2021 a new and ambitious agreement called BBNG. This treaty will contribute to the target of protecting at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. Fourth, I would like to recall the launch at the One Planet Summit for Biodiversity hosted by France in January of the Great Green Wall Accelerator with Sahelian countries. Partners have already pledged financing and around 16 billion euro for the 11 countries concerned in the next 5 years. Finally, I would like to stress that France is fully committed to the preservation of forests and promotes an increased level of cooperation on this topic through the Alliance for the Conservation of Rainforest. We invite you all to join the Alliance if you have not done it yet. To be consistent with our engagements, France has also launched a national strategy to eliminate by 2030 all products causing deforestation from our importations. Our mobilization must increase in the coming months, leading to COP15 and COP26. France will play its part and work hard with others. And as my Chinese colleague just said, President Macron and Chancellor Merkel had a very fruitful discussion last week with President Xi Jinping. The IUCN World Conservation Congress that will take place in Marseille, France in September will be a crucial milestone. Let's seize these opportunities to show that we are making the right decisions to tackle the environmental and climate emergency that threatens our existence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this very, very clear action points and a roadmap of decisions towards addressing the planetary emergencies. We did very pleased to hear those comments from you. Let me now turn to the Pierre of Peru, His Excellency Ambassador Nestor Bardeles. Over to you.
Thank you, dear Ligia, Excellencies. Climate change crisis, the loss of biodiversity, and the COVID-19 pandemic are creating the perfect storm for the rapid deterioration of our planet. We need to act together now with a sense of urgency and ambition to reverse this apocalyptic trend. We have heard from previous interventions that the time to ignore biological diversity as a generator of wealth and as the substance of the global economy is over. We must rethink the traditional models of economic growth and development. We need to implement nature-based solutions and to commit to a greener, more sustainable and inclusive development approach. The inclusion of an environmental dimension in economic recovery plans provides the opportunity to fill the gap between the current scenario of economic stagnation and decline, aggravated by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the momentum of the multilateral action to address serious global challenges, such as the loss of biological diversity, as shown by the overwhelming support to the leaders' pledge for nature. A very significant element, as expressed in Action 2E of the Leaders' Pledge, is the need to increase the linkages at the international level that promote an environmental perspective to the process of sustainable development. We must also address the need to improve technologies for the sustainable use of biodiversity, considering traditional knowledge and the needs and rights of the indigenous people. This interlinkage would help increase the contribution of biodiversity to sustainable development, as well as to reduce pressures on biological diversity and its related ecosystem processes. But this can only be achieved if we also improve cooperation and the participation of all sectors of the society towards a more sustainable economy. In that sense, we must promote more financing for projects to preserve the biodiversity in developing countries, particularly in mega diverse countries, by creating more funds like the GEF. The limited progress in achieving the Aichi biodiversity targets urges us to redouble our efforts and create an ambitious framework for the preservation, recovery, and sustainable use of biodiversity post-2020, fulfilling the mandate of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those very insightful comments. May I now call upon Lynn Lee of the World Wildlife Fund, Director for Global Policy and Advocacy, as a partner of this event and a representative of civil society, to please speak.
Thank you, Ligia. All the protocols observed. Esteemed colleagues, WWF is very pleased to be partnering on this very important event. Today, we have heard many talks about the importance of the super year for nature, climate, and people. The talks are their music to my ears. We see the direction of travel to live within the planetary boundary. WWF will continue our conservation effort on the ground with our partners to reach a future where we have seen zero loss of species due to human-induced extinction, zero loss of habitat, actually gain of our ecosystems, and half of our footprint through our consumption production to the nature, so that we can see a nature positive future by 2030. And specifically on this event matter, we are going to continue to support the ambition for nature with a focus on the following priorities. First, the Leaders' Pledge for Nature and People continues the ambition and efforts towards a nature positive, carbon neutral, and equitable future. And we will continue to welcome additional leaders to join the movement and action. Second, we like to see countries translating their ambition on the Leaders' Pledge into an ambitious and a transformational global biodiversity framework to be agreed in Kunming later this year to reverse loss of nature and be nature positive by 2030. Third, we would like to see continue building a movement of non-state actors to support these efforts and bring about the changes on the ground. Building on the learning of our collective failure from the past, we need to have a very strong focus on the drivers of biodiversity, as I mentioned, including the goal in the Global Biodiversity Framework to halve the footprint of our production and consumption by 2030 is critical. And all actors need to work together to effectively implement our collective commitments. With that, ladies and gentlemen, and your excellencies, thank you. Back to you, Ligia.
Thank you very much, Lee. Sorry, can you hear me? Thank you very much for those really interesting comments and for the strategic goals that you've outlined for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, we now have some requests from the floor, and I have great pleasure to invite Excellency PR of Brazil to speak, followed by the PR of Australia, the Excellency PR of Kyrgyzstan, and the PR of Nigeria. Excellency, the PR of Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And first of all, at the outset, let me thank the organizers for convening this very important meeting. As the world's most biodiverse country, Brazil has been actively engaged in international dialogues on climate change, biodiversity, oceans, and other crucial issues of the international environment agenda. As we recognize the urgency to deal with the climate crisis and other crucial environmental goals through multilateral dialogue, my country is looking forward to the forthcoming Leaders Summit on Climate and COP26 in Glasgow. With respect to biodiversity, Brazil looks forward to agreeing on an ambitious, balanced, and realistic post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at COP15 in Kunming, China. The framework should address the three pillars of the Convention on Biological Diversity in a balanced way, granting the often neglected sustainable use and benefit sharing pillars the same importance traditionally attached to the conservation pillar. In this vein, allow me to highlight that Brazil ratified last month the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Another point I would like to raise is the sustainability of our oceans, which play a vital role in both the biodiversity and climate agendas. The biodiversity of our oceans is key for the climate system, as it is responsible for the uptake and redistribution of most of the natural and anthropogenic carbon dioxide emissions. Nonetheless, unfortunately, in the past 3 decades, all the indicators of sustainability of our oceans have turned steadily downwards. According to the latest report on the state of the world fisheries and aquaculture by FAO, the percentage of fish stocks that are within biological sustainable levels have decreased from 90% in 1974 to 65.8% in 2017. The dramatic loss of fish stocks over the last decades becomes even more worrisome when we look at another figure in FAO's report. A large proportion of fisheries and aquaculture production is either lost or wasted, approximately 35% of the global harvest. Despite many efforts, we have failed to achieve SDG 14.6, as we have not reached an agreement in the WTO to eliminate by 2020 fisheries subsidies which have been contributing to overcapacity and overfishing, as well as to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. In this regard, let me emphasize that Brazil will remain a strong supporter of the oceans agenda. Furthermore, in addition to the WTO negotiations, we look forward to achieving an ambitious and balanced BBNJ agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Costa. Let me now turn to His Excellency, the PR of Australia.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our co-hosts for bringing us all together. For our part, we recognise the important link between climate change and nature, and the importance of conservation for climate change mitigation and adaptation and addressing biodiversity loss. At home, as part of Australia's economic recovery plan, an additional $1.8 billion will be spent on environmental recovery and restoration activities, including $250 million for our national parks and heritage areas, and $200 million to help native wildlife and their habitats recover from the impacts of the 2019-20 bushfires, which you'll all remember well across eastern and southeastern Australia. We implement and promote the use of nature-based solutions, including through protection and restoration of blue carbon ecosystems, rainforests, coral reefs, and marine protected areas. And also, we're taking action internationally. And Jonathan, I know you're very pleased about this, that we recently joined the UK-led Global Ocean Alliance, which, as we know, aims to protect 30% of the global ocean by 2030. Our own Australian marine protected areas cover 37% of our marine jurisdiction. We're also proud to support initiatives such as international partnerships for blue carbon, the Asia Pacific Rainforest Partnership, the Global Forest Observations Initiative, and the Global Ocean Alliance. We're actively preparing for the successful delivery of an ambitious yet focused Global Biodiversity Framework at COP15. One of Australia's key priorities is ensuring all sectors of society are engaged in biodiversity management. Young people, women, Indigenous people, local communities, industries, business, NGOs. We very much look forward to working with the global community to help create a framework that will foster transformational change, which we've all been talking about today, transformational change across societies so that we can address the challenges facing global diversity, particularly the key drivers of biodiversity loss. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ambassador Fifield. That was a very, very clear commitment to action that we've just heard from you. Let me now welcome His Excellency, the PR of Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you very much, ESG Ms. Ligia Narona. At the outset, let me thank my distinguished colleagues, ambassadors of Bhutan, Colombia, and the EU for their leadership and hosting this important event. And many thanks to our brilliant panelists for their excellent presentations. Indeed, global climate change and human activities lead to dramatic changes in the planet's environment. Currently, 1 million species of flora and fauna are under extinction. 3/4 of land and more than 60% of seas change due to human activities. The Kyrgyz Republic considers that the factors mentioned above pose challenges, but at the same time opens vast opportunities for cooperation to find solutions for the existing problems. My country, Kyrgyzstan, is proud to contribute to the global efforts in preserving world's biodiversity. In this context, on April 16, last week, during the plenary meeting of the UN General Assembly, UNGA adopted by consensus a new resolution initiated by the Kyrgyz Republic entitled Nature Knows No Borders, Transboundary Cooperation, a Key Factor for Biodiversity Conservation, Restoration, and Sustainable Use. Along with the general support of all member states, 60 UN members co-sponsored the resolution, which confirms strong global support. The new resolution aims to preserve the world's biodiversity through cooperative actions for providing future generations with a pure, safe, and stable environment, and the rational use of natural resources under the principles of sustainable development and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. I would like to emphasize that the resolution adopted by the initiative of Kyrgyzstan is one of the few specialized UN documents covering the issues of transboundary collaboration between the UN member states in ecology, which is now becoming increasingly relevant at the international, regional, and bilateral levels. The promotion of transboundary cooperation is timely because of the restrictions for deterring COVID-19. The effect of such restrictions prove how our world is interconnected. And we are confident that the new resolution is an excellent contribution to international cooperation on environmental issues and will be widely implemented by the UN member states. I thank you.
Thanks so much, Ambassador Moldaseva, and especially for bringing to our attention the importance of transboundary collaboration in the context of COVID and the challenges that it has presented us. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to His Excellency, the PR of Nigeria, Her Excellency.
Thank you very much, President of the General Assembly, UN Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Certainly, the day is fast spent. Let me simply add that I'm delighted to be part of this conversation and to thank the many members of the General Assembly and partners who have worked hard to arrange this very important event on raising ambition for nature being ahead of the 15th session of the Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD COP15. Now, this is another opportunity for us to really demonstrate measurable commitment to accelerate action toward the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Indeed, I join others in emphasizing what really has come clear, i.e., except we urgently halt and reverse the current trajectory of environmental degradation, climate change, and diversity loss, we will continue to witness unimaginable health concerns and socioeconomic shocks. I might add conflict and unwanted migration. These are serious issues. Now, Nigeria has been committed to working with others in dealing with this issue of enhancing the biodiversity. It has a very strong strategy relating to this, and it has reviewed its laws. It has developed shelter beds across the 11 states in the country, and has been very strong supporter of the Great Green Wall Initiative. There have been efforts to deal with pollution remediation in Ogoni land, and this is really a major issue for Nigeria. To better ensure compliance and conservation mainstreaming, efforts are ongoing to establish an environmental desk in all relevant federal agencies and institutions. Meanwhile, there is regular monitoring of conservation plots, agricultural lands, wildlife domestication, aquaculture, and conservation of medicinal plants in the country. Now, to further ensure that this succeeds, women, youth, and other hitherto marginalized groups have been brought at the center of the implementation of our biodiversity strategies and action plans. Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, the strong conviction in Nigeria is that we do need, for Nigeria and for neighboring countries, to deal with diversifying not only nature, but to ensure that the Lake Chad, which is really a major element of life and livelihood in the sub-region, is recharged. And Nigeria has led and is leading efforts to galvanize support for the project, which is really, really key to bringing stability and improved livelihood to millions of people across 6 or 7 countries in the region of Africa, of West Africa, Central Africa, and beyond. Now, COVID-19 has made it very clear that mainstreaming efforts to include biodiversity is critical to our health and the health of the planet, which are connected, and this has been underlined by every speaker previous to my remarks. Now, Nigeria has really worked with agencies around the country and across the world to guarantee that this continues to be the case. Now, I would like to conclude by stating that time is of the essence. Ambitious, concrete commitments to investment in nature are required to protect and restore our natural environment. It's in this regard that the government of Nigeria, the federal government of Nigeria, hopes to explore the instructive values of biological diversity to provide essential services critical for sustainable development, poverty eradication, and food security to improve the well-being of all Nigerians. Nigeria is committed to all global biodiversity frameworks that will facilitate that transformational changes needed to achieve the 2050 vision for biodiversity. My delegation urges all of us to work hard at implementing all biodiversity-related multilateral environmental agreements, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Strategic Plan for Forests, and the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I certainly will say on behalf of Nigeria, we look forward to all the meetings that will be holding this year in China and in the UK and others to continue to deal with this matter. And I'm very happy to see active participation of a broad range of missions and organizations in this discussion. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mohamed Bande, and thank you for bringing to the fore also the issue of migrants, which has not been perhaps sufficiently discussed, and have been one of those been really, really impacted by the COVID crisis. With this, Excellencies, we come to the end of that segment, and so I have great pleasure in inviting the PR of Belgium, His Excellency Ambassador Philippe Kudelka, for the closing remarks.
Dear friends, it is my duty and my pleasure to thank all the speakers, partners, and co-hosts for making this event possible. Lydia from UNEP and Kani from UNDP have done a great job moderating today's event, and we gave them a difficult task with a complicated speakers list. Thanks to both of you for the outstanding job of guiding our rich discussion today. The Secretary General, my dear colleagues, has often repeated that we need to stop waging war on nature. And today we have heard many concrete examples of what that means. And I want to urge everybody around this table today to take a moment and to think what more we, our governments, our companies, our civil society can do to make a difference and raise ambition for nature. Belgium is putting its shoulders under a number of recent initiatives. We are a blue leader, supporting the certification of 30% of the high seas as marine protected area by 2030. We have launched the Beyond Chocolate initiative, something important for Belgians, with public and private partners to source 100% sustainable cacao by 2025. We are an important donor to UNODC's work on combating corruption and wildlife crime in Africa, which is also a growing dimension of our bilateral cooperation agreements. Our Prime Minister has endorsed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature with 10 concrete steps towards an ambitious post-2020 biodiversity framework. And finally, through the UNESCO Eraift Postgraduate School on the campus of Kinshasa University, we are supporting the training of tropical forest managers from all over Africa in the Congo DRC. One key issue will be unlocking the necessary resources to address biodiversity loss. We heard it from several speakers today. In Belgium, we believe that we need to increase and better align public and private financial flows to allow for a transition to a biodiversity supportive environment. And without any further ado, one microphone is open. And without any further ado, I would like to thank once again all participants for joining us today. Please take a moment to read all the valuable input provided in the Zoom chat. And it's not too late. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Unfortunately, the Ambassador, the PR of Costa Rica, had to leave. So all that's left for me to do is to quickly summarize. Someone has their mics open and I can't figure out. So if you could please close your mic. 5 key points that have emerged from this discussion. One is the absolute clear leadership and ambition for nature that we've heard from all of you. Very clear commitments to action from both state and non-state actors. A clear support for an ambitious global biodiversity framework post-2020. Very, very clear discussion on the means of implementation and more innovative means of implementation. With that, let me thank all the organizers for this fantastic lineup of speakers and all the participants and everyone who's been connected for being here with us so patiently. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, I close this event. Thank you so very much for this evening.
Thanks. Thanks for all the excellencies and friends. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.